I'm gonna go through the eye. I have posted videos, but you know, I like to draw it out. So I want to go through the eye through its tunics and then go through some conditions. So when we start with the eye, the first thing that you always do is you go over the outer tunic. Now, I'm going to use a light color. When we talk about the eye and the outer tunic, the first thing that I always talk about is the cornea, and I'm using a light blue because this is a translucent or clear portion of the eye which allows light to enter, and it's always part of your outer tunic. So the next thing that I'll draw, which is part of your outer tunic or your outer layer, is the sclera. Now the sclera is typically white. Since I'm using white paper, I'm gonna draw it as this black color. So your outer tunic is gonna include the sclera, which is always the white portion of the eye. The big job of the sclera, or there's several functions of it, is to maintain the shape of the eyeball, but it also, the word sclera means hard, so it's gonna also serve as the attachment of your extrinsic eye muscles. So it maintains the shape, it's hard, so it's gonna be attachment for your external eye muscles. And then when we talk about the outer tunic, this would be your cornea. Your cornea is clear. It is continuous with the sclera, and it's translucent. So basically this is gonna be like the window looking into the eye. It allows light to pass through. And then in the very back part of the fibrous tunic is your optic nerve. So this is the optic nerve, which is cranial nerve 2, which helps you with vision. So all of these are part of your outer tunic. It literally makes the shape of the eyeball. Now, before we move on, I do want to go over the outer portion of the eye. So when we talk about the sclera, I'm just gonna draw an eye, a regular eye. When you look through the cornea, you're gonna see the pupil, and you're gonna see the colorful portion of the eye, which I'll just draw as green because green is a pretty color of some people's eyes. So the word iris literally translates to rainbow. So you know, you could have hazel eyes. There are 2 different types of muscles inside of the iris that I'm going to talk about, and I'll use this picture most likely, but I really want to talk about the sclera. The sclera is going to serve for the attachment of your extrinsic eye muscles. So there's 6 extrinsic eye muscles that attach to the sclera, and those are going to be your superior rectus muscle, which actually helps you look up. So when you look directly up, this is your superior rectus eye muscle, and its primarily job is to help you look up. So the sclera serves for the attachment for your 6 extrinsic eye muscles. To look down, you primarily use your inferior rectus muscle. To look medially, you use your medial rectus muscle. To look laterally, to look to the side, you use your lateral rectus muscle. Now, when you look to the side, you use both eyes. So if you were looking to your left with both eyes, you're looking to the left with both eyes. Your right eye is using the medial rectus to pull it to the left, and your left eye is using the lateral rectus to pull it out. Now, one thing that's completely different is when you talk about the inferior oblique, so the direction of the movement is going to be indicated by my arrow. They're primary movements anyway. When you say inferior oblique, your inferior oblique, even though it's inferior, it actually helps you look up and away from midline. So it goes in an opposite direction. So your lacrimal gland is always right here. This is your lacrimal gland. So when you look up and away from midline, that technically is your inferior oblique muscle. So we know that the medial rectus is medially, so this is up and away from midline. So midline is where your medial rectus is. Now, your superior oblique is going to help you look away from midline as well, but down and away from midline. So, down and away from midline. So I'm going to do 2 arrows right here. Now, there is a fibrous loop called the trochlea that is going to basically sit right here. And that fibrous loop allows for the superior oblique to come down and then away from midline. So your superior oblique helps you look down, the arrows going down, and away from midline. The superior oblique muscle is the only one that goes through the trochlea, which is a fibrous loop. And then the next thing that you would say about the extrinsic eye muscles is literally talking about the cranial nerves that control them. So cranial nerves 3, 4, and 6 make the eyes do tricks. SO4, LR6, all else 3. That's talking about cranial nerve 4, 6, and 3 and which muscles are controlling what. I went over that with the cranial nerves. So when we talk about the sclera is going to help us maintain the shape of the eyeball, but it's also going to serve for the attachment of the extrinsic eye muscles. So your sclera is going to be how they attach. The sclera is the white portion of your eye. So when we talk about the outer tunic, we have the cornea, which is translucent. It literally is the window that's going to allow light to pass into the eye. The sclera provides the shape and the attachment for muscles. And then your optic nerve, which is a cranial nerve 2, is going to help you with vision. So that is your outer fibrous layer. So we've gone through the outer layer. Now, your next layer is called your vascular tunic. Now, technically, the next layer that you have is going to have a mixture of blood vessels. That's why it's vascular. And it's going to have melanocytes, which actually gives it a maroon color in the models that we draw. So I'm going to use like a fuchsia color to represent a mixture of brown for melanocytes and a mixture of red for the vascular layer. So now we're on the inner layer. It's literally this next layer. The next layer is vascular, so it's going to have to provide blood vessels to help maintain nutrients to the sclera, but it also has melanocytes, which give it a brown pigment color to it. Now, this is called your choroid coat. The word choroid means skin-like. So technically, your choroid coat is going to contain blood vessels because it's part of the vascular layer, but it's also going to have melanocytes. So we said light enters through the cornea. Well, light needs somewhere to absorb. So when you wear a dark color in the summer, like a black t-shirt or a brown t-shirt or a really dark t-shirt, the light is going to absorb into anything that's dark. So light passes through the cornea and it's going to be absorbed in the choroid coat, and it prevents scatter of light. It literally helps attract and absorb light. So that's part of your middle layer, your middle tunic. Now the reason I did it as this pink color is it's got blood vessels, which are red, and melanocytes, which is the pigment that makes the color of your skin. So really a better color would be maroon. So the word choroid coat literally means your skin coat, which is going to be a brown color to absorb light. Now, attached to your choroid coat is a muscle, smooth muscles that come right here This is a muscle, so I'm using red. This is known as your ciliary bodies. So it's pretty much the anterior portion of your choroid coat. Now, the ciliary bodies, there's two of them. It's a smooth muscle. And this muscle literally is going to contract and relax to change the shape of the lens. So the lens is going to be right here. The lens is also, whoops, that's not the color I thought it was going to be. The lens, let me find my blue pen, wherever you are. Yeah, blue pen or black pen. It doesn't really matter as long as it's not blue because my cornea is blue. Now your lens is basically a translucent round structure that's going to have to change shape to help you see near and far. So when we talk about the lens has to change shape to help you view things near and far. So the ciliary body is the muscle that is going to be basically contracting and relaxing to change the shape of the lens. Now, something that attaches to the lens are ligaments. Now these ligaments are going to be known as suspensory ligaments. So they literally suspend the lens in place. So to change the shape of the lens to help you see near and far, we have to understand how the ciliary body and the suspensory ligaments work. I'll go over that here in a minute. To review, the cornea, the sclera, and the optic nerve. The cornea is a translucent, fibrous outer layer that allows light to enter. The sclera maintains the shape and attaches the extrinsic eye muscles. The optic nerve helps you with seeing. So that's all part of the fibrous tunic. Your choroid coat is the vascular layer. It contains melanocytes. Choroid is skin-like. Melanin is the pigment we put in our skin, which is going to basically absorb scattering light, so it basically has somewhere to go. The ciliary body is a muscle that's going to basically control the suspensory ligaments, which is going to help change the shape of the lens to help you see near and far. Okay, I'll go over that here in a second. The next thing when we talk about the vascular middle layer is we have our iris. So since I'm drawing a picture like this, in front of your lens, I'm going to draw it in green, you have your iris. Now your iris technically means rainbow, so the iris can be any color in any person. The iris is going to be composed of two different muscles. So when you look at the iris, we have muscles that are circular called the sphincter muscles, the papillary sphincter muscles, which are going to basically close off the pupil. But they also have a muscle that go around like this, which is called the papillary dilator muscle. So when we talk about the iris, it can be any color, but it basically is going to control the shape of the pupil, which is where light has to enter to go to the back of the eye. So your pupil is literally this part right here, which is like a black hole that allows light to pass to the back of the eye. So the iris, when you look at it, it's going to appear like it has little inflections in it. There's two different types of muscles. So these control the shape of the pupil. So you have two different types of muscles. You have the papillary sphincter, which is basically going to constrict the pupil. So your pupil gets really small. And then you have muscles that go out, they're smooth muscles that are called papillary dilator muscles. These are inside of the iris. So the iris's job is not just to provide a pretty little color. These are muscles that give it this nice round shape. So the papillary dilator muscles is going to do pupil dilation. It is going to make the pupil larger. So that's the iris. It's part of the middle tunic. So we can basically go through over all of the areas. We can say the cornea is going to allow for light to enter. However, the iris is going to control how much light goes into the pupil to enter the back of the eye. Now the lens is going to change shape so that basically we can focus on near and far objects. This is going to have to change shape to see near and far. Well, the way we change the shape of the lens is going to be through the ciliary body and the suspensory ligaments. Another part of your middle vascular tunic is your choroid coat. The word choroid means skin. The melanocytes in our skin produce melanin, which helps absorb light. So this is going to help you absorb scattering light. So that's all part of the middle vascular tunic. So you literally could be making a list. You have your outer layer, which is the cornea, the sclera, the optic nerve, and the extrinsic eye muscles. And then you have your middle vascular tunic, which is the choroid coat, ciliary body, suspensory ligaments, lens, the iris, and the pupil. So we probably need to label your pupil. There's your pupil. All right, now we're to the inner tunic. Now, your neural inner tunic. It's called neural because it's going to have photoreceptors, which are going to detect light. Now, this one has to be attached to the choroid coat so that it can have blood vessels supply it, you know, to make sure it doesn't die. This is called your retina. Now, your retina is your inner layer. Your retina basically has all your photoreceptors, which we call rods and cones. So, your retina has photoreceptors that detect light. There's two. There's rods. Rods basically help you see outlines of images. It's got the pigment, which we call rhodopsin, which comes from vitamin A. It's very light sensitive, but it only helps you see outlines. Now, the other type is cones. Cones are going to be another type of photoreceptors, and these have a pigment called iodopsin and photopsin. And then photopsin is broken down into three pigments called erythrolabe, cyanolabe, and chlorolabe. And cones help you see color vision. So remember, cones, think of snow cones for color vision. So these are going to be night vision for outlines, and cones you only see with light vision. And when all three colors are stimulated, they say you see white. So technically, this is white to me, so I guess my erythrolabe was red, and my cyanolabe is blue, and my chlorolabe are all sensing that this is a white color. So there's a little bit about retina. You can watch the PowerPoints. Now, part of your inner tunic, right here where your optic nerve comes in, there's a lot of blood vessels right here. This right here has no photoreceptors. This is known as the optic disc. There are literally no rods or cones right here at the optic disc in front of the optic nerve. So because there are no photoreceptors, this is your anatomical blind spot. There's no photoreceptors at all, but it is part of your inner tunic. Now, we do focus on this middle back portion of the retina, and it is a spot right here. The word for spot is macula, and lutea literally means the yellow spot. It's in the middle of the eye, on the retina. So the macula lutea literally translates into the yellow spot. Now the macula lutea is very important because in the center of the macula lutea you have an indentation called the Fovea Centralis. Now we learned fovea means pit, but the Fovea Centralis right here has the most abundant amount of photoreceptors. So technically when you say retina, you're also going to include the macula lutea and the Fovea Centralis because it's the area of the retina where you have the most photoreceptors. So that's all part of the retina. The optic disc, I did not put any orange right here because it lacks photoreceptors. But on the retina, you have the yellow spot, the spot that's yellow, macula lutea, and then you have the Fovea Centralis, which has the most photoreceptors. Now, the last thing that we talk about when we talk about the eye is that the retina has to stay attached next to the choroid coat, and if it doesn't, you go blind. So we divide in front of the lens and behind the lens into cavities. So if we were talking about the cavity behind the lens, the cavity behind the lens is called the posterior cavity. And the posterior cavity is going to be filled with vitreous humor. Now vitreous means glass, so it literally is a liquid that is glass-like, and what its job is to basically keep the retina attached to the choroid. So technically, this is going to be filled with vitreous humor. Vitreous humor keeps the retina attached to the choroid. Now, the anterior cavity would be in front of the lens. I'm just going to draw it right here, and it goes from the lens to the cornea. This is further divided into the anterior and posterior chamber of the anterior cavity, but when we talk about the anterior cavity has to maintain distance between the lens and the eye. It can't shrink. It's going to be filled, C with a line over it is with aqueous humor. Aqueous humor is more like a water-like liquid that is going to be produced by the ciliary body, which is going to basically keep everything with nutrients and everything like that. I think the only thing I have left is the ora serrata, which is serrated. This is basically just a boundary line. Here is your ora. Ora means eye, serrata, and it's just a boundary. I don't really make you know a lot of functions about the ora serrata. All right, so I want to go through again. The outer layer. The cornea is translucent. It's clear. That's why I drew it in this blue color, which is going to allow for light to enter the eye, the cornea. The sclera helps maintain the shape, and it is attachment for the extrinsic eye muscles. The optic nerve is for vision. So literally you could say, I'm gonna write this on another piece of paper. You've got your fibrous outer tunic. You've got your sclera, your cornea, and your optic nerve. Okay, then we have our vascular, vas means blood vessel, middle tunic. You should be able to go through this and know it pretty easy, and I always color code it to help you kind of understand it. So the first thing I started with was the choroid coat. So this is supposed to be maroon. It's a mixture of blood vessels and melanocytes. And why do we have melanin? To absorb light, to prevent scatter of light. So we had the choroid coat. Okay, the next thing, when you follow the choroid coat anteriorly, you have muscles called ciliary bodies, which are going to control the shape of the lens. And then the suspensory ligaments are attached to the ciliary bodies, which suspend the lens in place. Now the lens has to change shape to help you see near and far. So you can literally write ciliary body. There's two of those. Suspensory ligaments. Both of these are going to control the shape of the lens to help you focus light towards the back. Okay. The next thing that we talked about for the middle tunic is the iris, which has muscles as well, which controls the shape of the pupil to regulate how much light actually enters the posterior cavity. So iris, remember it has two different types of muscles. The pupil is going to allow light to go from the front to the back of the eye. And then you have your inner neural tunic. Neural because it's going to have receptors. The innermost tunic. So we start with the retina. Now, on the retina, we talked about rods and cones, but a part of the retina would be the macula lutea. On the macula lutea, you talk about the fovea centralis. On the place where we lack any photoreceptors is the optic disc. And then you have the ora serrata. So we talked about all the layers and what they do. And then the last thing that we covered is the posterior cavity is literally just the cavity posterior to the lens that is filled up with vitreous humor, which is a jelly-like glass substance, so it is clear. It's going to keep the retina attached to the choroid so that you don't go blind, so that would be a retinal detachment. And then the anterior cavity is the lens to the cornea, which contains the aqueous humor. Now, we talked about the ciliary body and the suspensory ligaments. So I want to go more into detail over suspensory ligaments and the ciliary body. But I'm going to stop this video and do a whole video on the shape of the lens and eye disorders.